Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled Brainstorm, Natalie Wood. Alright, and it's another disturbing story. You know, I've done quite a few videos on Natalie Wood, not her real name. It's Natasha Zakarenko is the birth certificate name for Natalie Wood, who was born in San Francisco, California. If you didn't know, back in 1938, her parents moved down to Van Nuys, Burbank area, when she was very young, and they took work in the studio business. Natalie's father built and tore down sets in the studio hangars. Her mother worked as a secretary, administrative assistant for one of the big studios. I forgot the name. And Natalie Wood's first speaking role in a Hollywood film was with Orson Welles. And that was in 1946 in the film Tomorrow is Forever. That's right. That's right. I said tomorrow is forever. But we know in the case of Natalie Wood, tomorrow was only until age 43. Until age 43. So in other words, she had approximately 36 more years for her tomorrows. She only had 36 years of tomorrows after appearing with Orson Welles in Tomorrow is Forever, her first speaking role. And by the way, her mother or an assistant on the set murdered a butterfly, pulled the wings off a butterfly in order to make Natalie Wood cry on cue. Because Natalie Wood didn't take her direction very well, so they murdered a butterfly to make Natalie Wood cry. I mean, I'm crying about how she was murdered at age 43 by being tossed into the ocean at Santa Catalina Island at 3 o'clock in the morning on November 29th, 1981, when she was only 43 years old. And I'm going to implicate Christopher Walken in her death, since he was on board her yacht, the 64-foot Splendor. That's right, I said the Splendor, named after a William Holden film, Love is a Many Splendored Thing, or named after Splendor in the Grass, a film that Natalie Wood starred in with Warren Beatty, who's the brother of Shirley MacLaine, if you didn't know. He's the younger brother of Shirley MacLaine. Anyway, Warren Beatty appeared with Natalie Wood in Splendor in the Grass. She was very young in that film as well. Anyway, I find it more than ironic, really more than ironic, that Natalie Wood, who's working with the Jewish studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, and she first worked with Orson Welles. And of course, Orson Welles last worked with Sharon Tate in the film 13 Chairs in Rome, Italy. And that was Sharon Tate's last Hollywood film that she ever did before she was murdered by NATO forces in Benedict Canyon, in basically a porn set at Cielo Drive, where three cul-de-sacs come together: Sunbrook Drive, Angelo View Drive, and Bella Drive. Where those three cul-de-sacs, which are dead-end roads, come together, you have the murder scene for Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frykowski, Tom Coomer, a.k.a. Jay Sebring, and the homosexual 18-year-old boy, Stephen Parent, who was on his way to a homosexual older man who wrote Trouble with Tribbles for the William Shatner Star Trek episode, Trouble with Tribbles. Yeah, Stephen Parent had a date with the knucklehead who wrote that script in Van Nuys, California. Didn't make the date. True story. True story. And the Jewish screenwriter has even written about it publicly. All right, so what I wanted you to know is that the last film that Natalie Wood worked on is entitled Brainstorm, where she starred with Christopher Walken, who was on the boat with her the night that she died, along with her husband, who she married twice. She married him, she divorced him. He was a bisexual man, allegedly. And then she remarried him, and then he's on the boat with Christopher Walken and Natalie Wood, and then the skipper of the Splendor. And so she was murdered, okay? She can't swim. She's not going to go swimming in November in freezing cold water when she can't swim in pitch darkness at 3 o'clock in the morning. So she got murdered. And Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken know exactly what happened, to a T. And neither one has been charged with a crime. So before I get into a discussion about Brainstorm, which is very disturbing, okay, and the director-producer of it, and of course MGM is going to be the distributor of Brainstorm, which didn't get released for 2 years after Natalie Wood's death. All right, so I want to get into a little Benedict Canyon cult magic tell. All right, so my last video was regarding Elizabeth Montgomery, who died at 1230 Benedict Canyon Drive, cul-de-sac, off Benedict Canyon Drive, the drive. See, there's the drive, and then there's the dead-end cul-de-sac drive. Anyway, Elizabeth Montgomery, a.k.a. Samantha Stevens, the Good Witch, she lived in Benedict Canyon on Benedict Canyon Drive cul-de-sac at 1230 Benedict Canyon Drive. All right, she died of colon cancer at age 62. She was married to Robert Foxworth, who had recently starred in a Columbo murder series. But Columbo is involved with Elizabeth Montgomery more than you know, because there are two Columbos specifically I'm going to refer to. One is my favorite Columbo episode of all 89, is Identity Crisis, starring Patrick McGoohan. And both of the episodes I'm going to talk about feature Patrick McGoohan, who's Irish-Scottish, and he was the star of The Prisoner BBC television show, which is about a British intelligence officer who wants to resign and retire, but instead is hijacked, kidnapped, and sent to an island where he becomes a prisoner. Hence the name of the film, The Prisoner. It's to prisoner dilemma game, mind restructure him into reconsidering retirement and going back into active duty. That's the Patrick McGoohan portrayal of the prisoner, which I believe he had a number, right? Because you don't your name, you don't use names, you use numbers. Everybody's got a number in The Prisoner. Anyway, Patrick McGoohan appears as a CIA agent by the name of Nelson Brenner in the 1975 Identity Crisis. And we have, of course, Peter Falk, a Jewish, Polish, Hungarian Jewish man who wants you to think he's Italian, which he's not, and he's the crack detective. And then we have the David White, who played William Colby, who was the CIA director in 1975. William Colby. I've done quite a few videos on William Egan Colby, if you didn't know. Anyway, so we have David White, who plays Larry Tate in Bewitched. He plays Darren Stevens' boss at the advertising agency, Larry Tate. But he also plays the CIA director for the Columbo episode Identity Crisis. And there's a meeting between the CIA director and Nelson Brenner on the Enchanted Hillside, which is directly above the Sharon Tate murder scene, which is directly above the Elizabeth Montgomery home at 1230 Benedict Canyon Drive. Okay? So in other words, the CIA is triple laughing in your face. They don't think you're smart enough to know that Larry Tate is playing William Colby, and they're meeting directly above the Sharon Tate murder, which had happened 6 years before. And here they are revisiting the Sharon Tate murder scene, just, very walking distance from above Sharon Tate's murder. If you walked up Angelo Drive from Sunbrook Drive, you could walk to where this film episode with Patrick McGowan and David White was filmed, where David White landed on a helicopter in the undeveloped portion known as the Enchanted Hillside. And they have a discussion about bugging Columbo's house and car, that they would install surveillance listening devices in to the Columbo family, which he did. Okay, and then the second Columbo episode that I want to bring out that touches this story that's going to involve Natalie Wood and Elizabeth Montgomery and Benedict Canyon is something that was entitled Agenda for Murder, again starring Patrick McGowan as the murderer. And in this film, Patrick McGowan plays Oscar Finch, who's a private corporate lawyer and criminal defense lawyer as well, who was formerly trained at the district attorney's office in earlier times. He was a prosecutor for Los Angeles County. Anyway, he comes into the film because the last phone call that Frank Stapleton made, who was associated with the mob and racketeering, that's code for CIA operative, made a phone call to Oscar Finch's home in Bel Air, Beverly Hills. And so that's how Columbo got on the track of Oscar Finch, who's this prominent Los Angeles lawyer, right? And so Columbo asks Oscar Finch what was the last word spoken by Frank Stapleton before he evidently committed suicide by shooting himself in the head, which we all know from watching my videos. When you hear about someone that lives in Beverly Hills or Bel Air or West Hollywood shooting themselves in the head, you know it's a murder. You know it's a murder that they're going to call a suicide. Because we had that already with Superman, George Reeves. We had that already with Jean Harlow's husband, Paul Levy Byrne, who did that on Benedict Canyon on Easton Drive. We had that continuously going on in Hollywood where people shoot themselves in the head and it's called a suicide because someone else pulled the trigger, right? Especially when the gun goes off 4 times. In the case of Superman, you tell me you have to shoot yourself 4 times before you're dead? I don't buy the suicide story, okay? Anyway, so my point is that Columbo asked Oscar Finch what were the last words, and he said, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Jesus." And then Columbo repeated the words, "Oh, wow, that sounds distressing. What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" And then that word. Now that's the CIA Jewish Hollywood laughing in your face. You see, you have an Italian you have a Jewish man who's presenting himself as an Italian police detective, and he won't say the word Jesus. He repeats Patrick McGowan's words to a T. You see, if Columbo were really an Italian man, he would have repeated the word, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Jesus." But when it's a Jewish man uttering those words, you get, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" And that word. And that word. In other words, he's not going to say Jesus or Jesus Christ. Not going to say it because he's Jewish. He's not going to say Jesus. Do you see that? And do you understand that this movie came out in 1990, okay? Which is still before Elizabeth Montgomery dies. She dies in 1995. But before that, Patrick McGowan appears, as Nelson Brenner in Identity Crisis above the Sharon Tate murder scene. And in Identity Crisis, they present another CIA agent played by Leslie Nelson, who goes by Geronimo as his cover name, who gets hit in the head by a tire iron underneath the Santa Monica Pier. Now, that's exactly 6 years, almost to the day, when William Holden gets hit in the head by a tire iron, or something like a tire iron, in his apartment, 1 mile from the Santa Monica Pier, on Ocean Avenue in Santa Monica, right walking distance from the Santa Monica Pier. And in the Columbo, they're telling you 6 years in advance, that someone near the Santa Monica Pier is going to get hit in the head with the tire. And that someone happened to be the best man for Ronald Reagan and Nancy Davis's wedding. William Holden was the best man for the Ronald Reagan's second marriage. And that's William Holden. And he was murdered in his apartment on Ocean Avenue in Santa Monica 6 years after the Columbo episode Told You So. Told you that someone's going to get conked in the head in Santa Monica near the pier. And so it was. All right, well, we have that kind of crazy serendipitous coincidences going on with Natalie Wood, not her real name, Natasha Zakharenko, because she is starring in a Hollywood film called Brainstorm. Now let's discuss Brainstorm, because it's, I guess it won't surprise you if you've been watching my channel. I find it very disturbing. All right, so here's the deal on Brainstorm. First of all, it was directed and produced by Douglas Trumbull, spelled Trumbull. Now that's a very important name. He has a engineering background. He worked with Stanley Kubrick in 2001: Space Odyssey. Douglas Trumbull's father was in the military-industrial complex as an engineer also. Brainstorm was being filmed in 1981, when the year that Natalie Wood was murdered, and it had to be completed with Natalie Wood's younger sister, who you may have heard of, Lana Wood. Anyway, Lana Wood had to do some of the scenes after her sister died. Anyway, Brainstorm, it's a science fiction film, again, produced and directed by Douglas Trumbull. It's going to be distributed by MGM, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Christopher Walken stars, along with Louise Fletcher. You know, she played Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And, of course, Cliff Robertson, who's appeared in numerous military intelligence and CI films. He did 3 Days of the Condor with John Houseman and Robert Redford in Manhattan, New York, featuring the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, kind of telegraphing you that maybe something's going to go on there, that the CI had offices in the Twin Towers, which I seriously doubt they had, because those buildings were mostly empty. But the thing is that Cliff Robertson also starred as John Kennedy in PT-109. That's a Navy intelligence film, if you didn't know. Navy intelligence reconnaissance, that's what PT boats were, patrol boats. They're not attack ships. They're for tracking and monitoring ship traffic of the Japanese. Anyway, in the film Brainstorm, the plot is that scientists invent a brain-computer interface enabling device for sensations that can be recorded from a person's brain and then converted onto tape for others to either experience or study. The research team that conducts this includes an estranged husband and wife couple, Michael and Karen, as well as Michael's colleague, Lillian, who's played by Nurse Ratched, Louise Fletcher. And I believe that the estranged couple is played by, let me get this straight here, Dr. Michael Brace and Karen Brace. So that's Christopher Walken and Natalie Wood. They play a husband and wife who are estranged. And I wonder if they were playing that role on the Splendor the night that she was murdered, along with her real husband, Robert Wagner. So you have Natalie Wood, who's in a marriage with Christopher Walken in a film, and then you have Natalie Wood, who's in a marriage with Robert Wagner on the Splendor, and then she has her film husband and her real husband on the boat at the same time when she's murdered. So maybe they both murdered her, huh? Well, they both look like they're complicit in her murder. So they're either co-conspirators, or they did it together, or they're both keeping their lips sealed, right? Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken, because they're not going to talk about the murder of Natalie Wood, are they? No, they're not. Anyway, so Karen puts the recorder on while working with Michael and Lillian, and then Michael plays the tape back and realizes that emotional experiences are also recorded Michael tapes his memories of his times with Karen, which he then shares with her, and then they reconcile due to this Frankenstein machine that they created. You should know that the research into the brain-computer interface, of course, is being funded by the United States military intelligence community. That's the whole point of Brainstorm, is that these scientists are being paid money, and it's coming from the industrial military complex. That's the whole point of this film. Get it? They even have the Nurse Fletcher, Louise Fletcher, Nurse Ratched character. She suffers a heart attack, but as she feels her heart attack coming on, she records it with the brain-computer interface so that they then replay it and induce heart attacks into other people. Then, of course, one of the team members, played by, what was this character's called? Jordan Christopher has played Gordy Forbes, and he has sexual intercourse hooked up to the brain interface. And then they have some fun with that, right? It's a little pornography for you, right? So the military-industrial complex is the financiers for the Brainstorm interface. Anyway, enough on that. I guess my point is that I think you can see that we have a Hollywood film being produced that's depicting the military-industrial complex, again, with MK Ultra, mind control experiments. Now, once Natalie Wood gets murdered on November 29th, 1981, which is 13 days after they discovered the dead body of William Holden, which they discovered on November 16th, 1981, conked on the head, which then they said, oh, he hit his head on some furniture. No, he didn't. Oh, and he had a drinking problem. Okay, that's what they said about Noreen. Isn't that what they said about Noreen Kidd Shatner when she broke her neck in William Holden's swimming pool? That she'd been drinking? Not sure how she got the abrasions on her arm, and she's naked, and she's in the pool, and that William Shatner did not dive in the pool to save her. No, he called 911 from the house phone. Yeah, and then the 911 dispatcher told William Shatner to dive in the pool and rescue his wife, who's at the bottom of the deep end. And you know, that was on the 30th year anniversary of Sharon Tate's death, right? That was August 9th, 1999. Sharon Tate was murdered on August 9th, 1969. Don't you find it ironic that Sharon Tate, her last film was with Orson Welles before she gets killed, and that Natalie Wood's first speaking role in a Hollywood film was with Orson Welles, and that Orson Welles was associated with War of the Worlds and frightening the people of Manhattan and New Jersey by saying space aliens were landing in a farm in New Jersey and they were going to get us all. Orson Welles, Psych Ops with Manhattan and New Jersey with John Houseman. And then John Houseman goes on to star with Cliff Robertson in 3 Days of the Condor, where John Houseman plays a deputy director of the CIA, and that Larry Tate, a.k.a. David White, plays William Colby, the director of CIA, in real time above the Sharon Tate murder scene in Columbo's Identity Crisis, and that scene was filmed above Elizabeth Montgomery's home in Benedict Canyon, and that Natalie Wood's Splendor is docked at the Marina Del Rey Yacht Club, okay, which is where Dennis Wilson gets murdered 2 years later on December 28th, 1983. Dennis Wilson is murdered, drowned in the Marina Del Rey harbor. And this is where Lyle and Eric Menendez lease side-by-side apartments in the Marina Del Rey towers. The media has reported that as they spent like $700,000 on a condo. That is not true. Just because the media tells you that Jose and Kitty Menendez owned the home in Beverly Hills does not mean it's true, because they didn't own that home. Okay? That home was really controlled by Caracol Pictures, which is a CIA company. And they got to live in the home for free. And Lyle and Eric Menendez signed a lease for $2,600 a month for one apartment and $2,750 a month for the second apartment. And they're leasing space in the Marina Towers. Completely different than how the media reports it. But again, it's Marina Del Rey. That's also where Lyle and Eric Menendez, age 18 and 21, went on a fishing excursion to go shark fishing with their parents the day before their murder on Friday, August 19th, 1989. The Menendez boys went fishing for 7 hours with their mother and father on a private boat out of Marina Del Rey, which is where Natalie Wood sailed out of before she was murdered at Santa Catalina Island, which is the same place where Dennis Wilson gets murdered 2 years later. And that's in walking distance to where William Holden got conked in the head with a tire iron, which is where the Columbo episode Identity Crisis told you someone's going to get conked in the head with a tire iron in 1975. All right. Anyway, that's enough. My point is that Natalie Wood's last movie was with Christopher Walken and Cliff Robertson and Louise Fletcher, and it was directed and produced by Douglas Turnbull, who is up to his eyeballs with Stanley Kubrick doing moon landing films, and he's a member of the military intelligence community, okay? The director-producer of Brainstorm. And I'm going to put a link below. You can see it. He is up to his eyeballs in CIA film production. He was born in Los Angeles in 1942, and he died in Albany, New York at age 79 recently, February 7th, 2022. Douglas Hunt Turnbull died. But not before he was involved with lots of clandestine service science fiction style films, which involved NASA and the United States Air Force and military industrial complex. And he never went to any fancy school. He went to the El Camino Junior College, which is in Los Angeles County. No big deal. He didn't go to Harvard. He didn't go to MIT. He didn't go to Stanford. He didn't go to Yale. But this guy even worked on The Wizard of Oz. Did you know that? He briefly worked in creating visual effects for the 1939 movie The Wizard of Oz, which is a banking documentary. Douglas Hunt Turnbull. All right. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.